Wouldn't it be like the most petty, humiliating, yet startling thing if I just fired my hat?
Ron Howard was just 6 years old when he became the heart of Mayberry. With his freckled face and soft voice, America saw him as the perfect boy. But behind the white picket fences of the Andy Griffith Show, something much darker was happening. There was a cast member he dreaded, a cold presence behind a warm character. That tension, buried beneath the show's cozy charm, followed Ron for decades. It would shape the way he told stories, the way he handled conflict, and even the way he reacted when a real-life figure he once admired betrayed everything he thought they stood for. This is the story of Ron Howard, not just the child star or the Oscar-winning director, but the man who learned too early that the spotlight can't always hide the shadows. The Andy Griffith Show debuted in 1960, painting an idealistic portrait of small-town life. It was safe, nostalgic, and heartbreakingly wholesome. But the atmosphere behind the scenes? Not so simple. Ron Howard, then credited as Ronnie, played Opie Taylor, son of the gentle and wise Sheriff Andy Taylor. On screen, the cast felt like family. Off-screen, cracks quietly formed. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee, was beloved by audiences for her warmth. But Ron remembers her as distant. She was never cruel, but never warm either. She treated him like a co-worker, not a child. Director Howard Morris called working with her like navigating a landmine. Even simple cues triggered tension. And Andy Griffith, the show's rock, also struggled with her. At one point, he tried visiting her later in life to make peace. It didn't go well. The irony? Their characters were the emotional anchors of the show. What America watched was fiction. The real stories were whispered between takes. Ron Howard didn't have a normal childhood. He was raised in a showbiz family. His father, Rance Howard, was a working actor and writer. His mother, Jean, also performed. Cameras weren't just toys. They were tools. By 5, he had more credits than most adults. He appeared in The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, and more. But Opie changed everything. 8 seasons later, America had adopted him. But what the audience didn't see was the cost. He was tutored on set. His social life was built between takes. And through it all, he learned to smile, even when the vibe wasn't warm. Those years taught him how to survive in Hollywood. Keep your head down, stay professional, and most importantly, don't let personal pain interrupt a perfect scene. Frances Bavier's performance as Aunt Bee made her a television icon. But to Ron, she was a mystery, one that never felt maternal. Their dynamic was complex. She wasn't overtly cruel, but she kept a strict boundary, cold, firm, unyielding. Ron once described it as working with someone who had walls built around them. It wasn't just her demeanor that affected him. It was the quiet weight of feeling like an outsider in scenes meant to reflect family. Ron often found himself on set with a smile for the cameras and discomfort behind it. Bavier never treated him harshly, but never with affection either. For a young boy who lived much of his emotional life on sound stages, that absence hurt. During one episode, The Pickle Story, Ron had to eat jar after jar of Aunt Bee's famously awful pickles. What the audience didn't know? Ron absolutely hated pickles. Each take required him to pretend they were edible. Dozens of bites, hours of filming, and all next to a co-star who made him feel more like a prop than a partner. He later admitted that it was one of the most miserable filming experiences of his young career. The chill extended beyond scenes. During breaks, Bavier kept her distance. No small talk, no praise, just quiet professionalism that, to a child, felt like rejection. Later in life, Bavier called Griffith to apologize. She admitted she had been difficult. It was a rare moment of humility. But she never reached out to Ron. That silence stuck with him. It wasn't about bitterness. It was about clarity. Ron learned early. Some people will never see you the way the world does. And when you spend your childhood performing warmth for someone who won't return it, you remember. After the Andy Griffith Show, Ron landed another iconic role, Richie Cunningham in Happy Days. But by then, he was already itching for more. He had spent years performing scripted lines under harsh studio lights, working alongside legends, but constantly wondering what it would be like to control the narrative. Acting had given him fame, but it hadn't given him agency. Directing, he hoped, would. In 1977, he struck a deal with producer Roger Corman. He'd star in Eat My Dust in exchange for a shot at directing. That film became Grand Theft Auto, his directorial debut. It was chaotic, scrappy, and made on a shoestring budget. But it was his. More importantly, it proved something to Ron. He didn't need to wait for someone else to hand him a role. He could create his own. The boy who once felt invisible next to Aunt Bee now had a camera in his hands and a story to tell. That moment changed the course of his life. In the years that followed, Ron directed several made-for-TV movies, sharpening his skills behind the scenes. He studied scripts the way a detective studies clues, learning what moved people and what didn't. Slowly, he started weaving the themes he knew best: emotional restraint, buried conflict, quiet redemption, into his work. Ron wasn't just a former child star chasing relevance. He was a storyteller, one who understood emotion, tension, and resolution, not just on the page, but in real life. And the best stories? The ones where the hero quietly triumphs over the ghosts of his past. The 1980s cemented Howard's directorial legacy. Splash, 1984. With Tom Hanks, proved he could make hits. Cocoon, 1985, confirmed it. By the time he directed Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind, Ron Howard wasn't just successful. He was trusted. He directed human stories with scale, emotional stakes, internal conflict, quiet triumphs, stories like his own. His work stood out for its empathy. He didn't rely on shock or spectacle. Instead, he created deeply human characters navigating pressure, grief, discovery, and love. Audiences related to that, even if they didn't know why. Howard knew how to guide viewers through tension without ever losing sight of the heart. But success didn't quiet the critics. A Beautiful Mind faced backlash. The film omitted key parts of mathematician John Nash's life: his bisexuality, his estranged son. Howard admitted the omissions were intentional, to protect the story's focus. He wanted to center the mental illness, the brilliance, the marriage. But the backlash stung. Because when you choose what parts of a story to tell, someone always feels erased. Still, A Beautiful Mind became a cultural moment. It swept the Oscars, Best Director, Best Picture. And for Ron, it wasn't just a win, it was validation. The shy red-headed kid who once felt ignored on set now stood at the top of Hollywood, not because he demanded attention, but because he earned trust. Over the next 2 decades, Ron continued directing high-profile films: The Da Vinci Code, Frost, Nixon, Rush. Each one different, but all held together by a quiet belief: people's lives are complicated, and their truths matter. That belief didn't come from film school. It came from life, from Mayberry, from silence, from learning how to listen, and then how to lead. Years later, Howard directed Hillbilly Elegy, a film based on J.D. Vance's memoir. At the time, Vance wasn't a politician, just a man with a troubled past and a compelling story about grit, family, and the American dream. Howard approached the project earnestly, drawn to its emotional weight rather than its potential for political controversy. He envisioned it as a portrait of generational struggle, one that spoke to forgotten communities and internalized shame. He was careful with the tone, working to capture the nuance of a family torn between love and dysfunction. But in the years that followed, Vance's political rise took a sharp turn. From best-selling author to populist firebrand, Vance's rhetoric grew combative and polarizing. And to Howard, someone who believed in measured empathy, it felt like a betrayal of the story he had once tried to humanize. Howard didn't lash out publicly. That's never been his style. But those close to him said the disappointment ran deep. He had spent months trying to build a bridge through film, only to watch that bridge be used to cross into territory he didn't recognize. In subtle interviews and careful comments, Howard hinted at his discomfort. Not in anger, but in quiet reflection. It reminded him of a familiar feeling, the coldness of a co-star who never warmed to him, the distance between public image and private reality. For Howard, it wasn't just about politics. It was about trust, about telling someone's story in good faith, only to realize they've rewritten themselves into someone you no longer understand. And that kind of disillusionment doesn't explode. It lingers. Like a line you once believed, now crossed out in ink. While Hollywood exploded around him, Ron had an anchor, Cheryl. They met at 16, dated in a green VW Beetle, married in 1975. 50 years later, they're still together. No scandals, no headlines, just partnership. In an industry where love often feels performative, theirs has always been quiet and real. He credits her with everything. 4 children, countless milestones, the stability that let him dream, and the honesty that kept him grounded. Cheryl wasn't just a partner. She was his compass. The person who reminded him who he was before the cameras started rolling. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. In interviews, Ron has admitted that navigating fame, parenthood, and career ambitions wasn't always easy. There were times when schedules clashed, dreams collided, and life pulled in different directions. But they always came back to one thing: respect. Cheryl turned down early opportunities to chase her own spotlight. Instead, she focused on their family and her writing. A quiet force behind the scenes, she authored several books and raised their children with care and independence. Bryce Dallas Howard, now a director and actress herself, often speaks about her mother's strength and integrity as the foundation that shaped them all. On their golden anniversary, Ron didn't plan a flashy party. He took Cheryl for a ride in the same mint green Beetle from their first date. No cameras, no press, just music, wind, and decades of memories riding shotgun. Hollywood doesn't often celebrate this kind of love, but Ron does. Not in headlines, but in loyalty. Not in grand gestures, but in the way he's still writing their story. One quiet day at a time. For decades, Ron Howard played America's nice guy. Even behind the camera, he was seen as safe, stable, and steady. The Hollywood director who never raised his voice, never sought the limelight, and never let ego cloud the work. But that calm surface masks a life shaped by discomfort. Childhood fame, cold co-stars, public criticism, and political disappointment. These weren't passing phases. They were foundational experiences that shaped the artist he became. Ron learned early how to perform calm, even when things felt chaotic. It wasn't just acting, it was survival. On set, a forced smile became second nature. Off set, he listened more than he spoke. He studied people, observed conflict, and learned to navigate tension without ever letting it take him under. That's why his films feel personal, even when they're epic. In Apollo 13, it's not just the mission, it's the silence in the capsule. In Cinderella Man, it's not just boxing, it's the burden of survival. Howard's lens lingers where others would cut away, on quiet faces, restrained grief, and the moments people choose to endure rather than erupt. Even in success, Ron has avoided self-congratulation. While others chased blockbuster franchises or Twitter feuds, he focused on craft. He let the work speak. Because he knows something most people don't. Behind every polished performance is a wound. And sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who learned how to hide them best. Ron Howard never exploded. He never had a breakdown or a tabloid scandal. He didn't burn bridges or play the Hollywood game. He did something harder. He stayed kind. In an industry that rewards ego, he stayed humble. In a world that cheers loud controversy, he chose quiet consistency. And in a spotlight that can blind you, he learned to see clearly. He forgave. He moved on. He grew. And more than anything, he listened. That's what separates Ron from so many others. He listened to his castmates even when they didn't welcome him, to his critics even when they misunderstood him, and to his audience even when they weren't always loud. He transformed silence into substance. Instead of complaining about what he endured, he channeled it into art. And instead of letting early wounds define him, he used them as blueprints for building something better, for himself, for his family, and for every story he told. Ron Howard didn't just evolve, he endured. Not through force, but through grace. Not by shouting louder, but by watching longer. His revolution wasn't televised. It was filmed frame by frame, quietly, behind the camera, where real change happens. Because some of the strongest stories are the ones that don't need to shout. They just need to be told well and told true. And Ron Howard? He spent a lifetime doing exactly that. What Ron Howard movie touched you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, check out our deep dive into another icon who faced Hollywood's hidden battles. You'll find it right here on your screen.